We'd like to welcome everybody out here tonight. We're excited to have you all here. This is a wonderful event, and we're so grateful for everyone who has worked so hard to put this together. I want to give a shout out to Luann Barnes. She's on the board of the Silver Reef Museum, and they are the sponsors of this evening's event. And this is the second of 10 lectures that they will be hosting. And so thank you, Luann, for all of your hard work. She said she reached out to Carmen Snow, and Carmen was just excited and elated to help put this on tonight. So I also want to give a shout out to Carmen Snow tonight. And also the Washington City Youth Council, who are hosting us here tonight. We also have to thank the Nison's Band for the pre-music, and they will also be performing after. They are definitely a staple here in Washington, and I love seeing all these people coming through the door. There are some open seats sporadically through the crowd. We might need to set up extra chairs, which is a good problem to have. If the youth council would want to set up some additional chairs, that would be awesome. Thank you. Tonight's theme is Where Dixie Began, the pioneer heritage that inspires our future. And it's no secret that Washington City is among the greatest places to live. The fact is, our population is doubling every decade. So what is it that attracts people from all over to come here to Washington City? I know firsthand, I'm one of those people that's the dirty word, transplant, right? I am a contributor to Washington's changing demographics. I was born in northern Utah, but my life's journey has taken me to Illinois, where I went to middle school, and Florida and Germany, where I went to high school, Brazil, where I served a mission for my church, then to Washington, D.C. and Virginia, where I started the first 7 years of my career. And I finally found a home here in Washington, like many of you. By a raise of hands, how many of you are born and raised here? And how many of you are like me, a transplant? We love that you are here. I can tell you there are tens of thousands of people just like me, just like us, longing for a place of community, a place with rich heritage, timeless values, small town charm, a thriving and growing economy, and an optimistic outlook on the future, all surrounded by some of the greatest, most beautiful scenery on all the earth. So what we have going here in Washington, in this city, is special. It is uniquely Washington. So how did this place we call Washington come to be? That's what we're here to learn tonight. In the 1840s, thousands of people left their homes back east. They came to Utah seeking religious freedom and a place where they could live in peace and thrive and grow their families. A lot of them came here exhausted and ill, having buried children and family members along the way. They came to start anew, hoping for prosperity. From this weary group of early pioneers, Brigham Young asked 38 families, all from southern states, to travel to southern Utah to grow cotton. These Southerners were from Mississippi, Alabama, Virginia, Texas, Tennessee, and the Carolinas. This was the Cotton Mission, sometimes also called the Southern Mission. Washington City was the first town established in the Virgin Basin for the purpose of cultivating the land so that cotton could be grown. These families were the founders of what would become known as Utah's Dixie, so named by these stalwart Southerners who were no doubt homesick for the lives they had left behind. But Brigham Young, he wanted his people to be self-sufficient and independent of others. So 10 families under the direction of Samuel Jefferson Adair arrived in the Washington area on April 15, 1857. They knew exactly where they were going because John D. Lee had come earlier in 1852, and he reported to Brigham Young that there was plenty of water down here and that there was fertile ground south of the Virgin River that would be good for growing tropical plants and also good for growing cotton. So, on May 6th, 28 more Southern families came under the leadership of Robert D. Covington. They met the Adair group at what is now called Adair Springs on 200 East, and the next day they had a 2-day conference with President Isaac Haight from Cedar City. He was a leader in the LDS Church. They laid out the city and gave it the name of Washington in honor of our country's very first president. The first year in Washington was a hard year. Many lived in wagon boxes, or they actually dug dugouts in the side of the hill, and many families lived in those dugouts. Malaria was rampant, killing many and making others almost useless to perform any type of physical or manual labor. Dysentery and typhoid fever were common, and more of the babies and youngsters died than survived in that first year. Drinking water came from the same ditches that their cattle rummaged in, and every morning between the hours of 6 and 7, they would go dip in the irrigation ditches, the water that they would use in the household that day, and that was called dip water. Workers were malnourished and could hardly work a full day, but amid all of this, the boys and the men dug ditches and they built dams so that they could irrigate their fields south of the Virgin River. The cotton mission needed help, and Brigham Young provided that help. He instructed them to build the cotton factory in Washington, starting in 1865. He called 309 families in 1861 to come to augment the cities along the Virgin. So that's kind of a little bit of our history and where we came from and how Washington City was established. Tonight we have a great panel, so much knowledge up here on this table, and each of them are going to go through a different aspect of life in Washington, both back then and then transitioning into the city we are becoming. Tonight's lecture begins with Carmen Snow as Melinda Allison Kelly Covington, followed by Mike Harless, Washington City Historical Society president, George Staheli, who established the Old School Museum, Kurt Ivie, who serves on the city council, Ed Tracy, who is the president of the Washington Area Chamber of Commerce, and lastly, Kress Staheli, who is our mayor of Washington City. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Melinda.
His name was Milton Kelly, and I thought he was so handsome. He was in uniform. He had just got back from the Black Hawk War. Couldn't think of that for a minute. Anyway, he just got back, and I just fell head over heels for him, and we got married. Well, 9 months later, we had a baby, little Martha. Oh my gosh, was she the jewel of our eye. But sad to say, 2 days before her 6th birthday, she passed away. And just about 2 years before that, I had a little son that died at birth. So it was kind of a really sad time for us down there because we had lost 2 children. But we found the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we were baptized by my uncle, Colonel Charles Jefferson Hunt, and he baptized us and we joined the church. Not too long after that, there was a call out. We were in Nauvoo, and we were there when it was really bad, and we decided to move on to Iowa for a while. But then there was a call out for people to join the Mormon Battalion. And so Milton and I joined, and I became a laundress for the Mormon Battalion. And we got in with the group and headed out to Pueblo, Colorado. And in Pueblo, Colorado, just before we got there, we left the big group and went with my Colonel Jefferson Hunt, who was also going out because their families had got really sick, and they were the Attachment A. And so we got with them, and we went on into Pueblo with them. But after we got to Pueblo, Colorado, my husband went out a lot for doing the hunting and looking for things for us to eat. And he went out this one time, and he was gone for several days. And when he got back, he was really, really sick. And 2 weeks later, he passed away, which was very devastating to me because at that time, I was 6 months with child. And here I was alone in Pueblo, Colorado at the Mormon Battalion. So anyway, I stayed there because the sisters and the people were so good to me. And I had my little girl, Catherine Melinda Kelly. And I stayed there until July. When she was 6 months old, I headed on out to Salt Lake Valley. And I got on the Robert Adams Brown train, and there was this big, tall, handsome professor. Anyway, that's what I heard he was a professor. And his name was Robert Dockery Covington. Yeah, he was. We had a lot in common. I was there with my 6-month-old little daughter, and he was just coming back from the South, going back to Cottonwood, and he was a widower also. He was from Mississippi. Him and his wife, Elizabeth, crossed the plains over from Nauvoo to Salt Lake Valley, and they had 2 children with them. They had Emily Jane and John Robert Covington. And so they had the 2 children, and she was expecting. Well, along the journey, just about to Salt Lake, Elizabeth had her baby. And her health was really, really bad. And she ended up, they got to Salt Lake, and they were there for 2 months, and then she passed away. So here was Mr. Covington with 3 children to raise. And, you know, that's a hard duty for a man to do. But I knew I was going to be able to help him because I had a child, too, all by myself. But he had a few problems. One of his problems was thou this and thou that. I got so tired of hearing thou this and thou that. But I thought, well, I can just look past that. You know, some of us girls have to do that sometimes, look past what our guys do. So I looked past that, and he also had another one. He smoked a pipe. Oh, my goodness. Tobacco? Well, most everybody from the South smoked tobacco. So I had to live with that also. But that's okay. We got married in December of 1848 in Salt Lake, and we lived in Cottonwood. I loved it there. We lived there for quite some time. For about 1.5 years, we were so happy, and I was expecting our first child together. And so I said, oh my goodness, this is so exciting. The world's just working so good. But then all of a sudden, he got a call from Brigham Young to go on a mission. I says, how can you leave me here with 5 children and you're going on a mission, 4 children? And anyway, but I knew we had to do what the prophet said. So he left. Well, needless to say, December 28th, I had little Alice, and she was 7 years old when Mr. Covington came home. So I was home there with all the 5 children, raising them on my own in Cottonwood, and for 7 years. So, and that's what a lot of the women did back then. So that was really hard. So when he came home, he didn't see the little bride that he left. He saw a haggard old woman that had been working, taking care of all those kids all that time. So anyway, he was home for 2 months, and then he went into Salt Lake City. He was gone. He left in November, and he came back in December after Christmas. And when he came back, he had this beautiful little plural wife on his arm. Oh my goodness, I said, I'm not raising one more child. And do you know why I said that? Because she was the age of Emily Jane, his daughter, 17 years old. But Nancy Roberts was a beautiful girl from England, and she lost her parents, and she was here all alone. And anyway, he took her under his arm, and I had to pray and forgive and say, have a softened heart. And so that's how I ended up lived very happily with Nancy. But not too long, we were here, and Nancy had another little boy, and she passed away during birth, but she had a daughter, Phoebe, that was healthy and good. But this little boy passed away 2 months after. And just like Mr. Hess said before, a lot of people died down here. A lot of people from all the sickness and everything that was going around. And anyway, so I raised Phoebe. I ended up raising her daughter, Phoebe, up in the Covington home. And she was just a delightful daughter. One time, there was a knock on our door. The Indians always came to our door for provisions and different things on their way to California. And I said, they had this little 3-year-old Paiute girl with them. And Mr. Covington says, "What are you going to do with her?" And they says, "We're going to sell her into slavery to the Mexicans down in California." And we just couldn't let that happen. He went and got his best horse and traded for her. Well, we raised Alice, and her and Phoebe were the same age, and they were the best of friends. But like everything else, we lost her when she was age 15, when she got a childhood disease. Well, in 1857, the Adair family, Samuel Adair family, 10 families were called down to make a pathway to southern Utah for the Cotton Mission. And they arrived here, and when they got here, it was such a hard trip to get here. And when they got here, they found this green spring. It actually had green grass around it and cold water, and it was so gorgeous, even though everything around it was red dirt and red sand and nothing else. But that's where they stayed. And so we headed out. They called us. We were the second group that came. And when we came, there was 28 families that came. And when we arrived, we left Cedar City. Just to tell you how hard it was, it took us 6 long days to get from Cedar City to down here to southern Utah, because the terrain was so rugged and the mountains. It was a horrible, really hard way to get here. But when we got here, we also dug us a place out by Adair Springs. A lot of them slept in their buckboards, a lot of them slept in their wagons. But 2 years later, Mr. Covington and the Everett twins built the Covington home. It was called the Home on the Hill. And the reason it was called that, because the Southerners are known for their hospitality. And because of their hospitality, everything that happened, every function that happened here in Washington happened at the Covington home upstairs. Weddings, dances, marriages, like I said, weddings, parties, farewells, funerals, everything happened there. And even Brigham Young slept there. Talk to me later and I'll tell you a story about Brigham Young. I haven't got time tonight. But anyway, we love the Covington home. But I just want you to know, I'm so thankful that I was brought here. And we do tours of the Covington home. And you've got a little card in the back, and if you want to hear the whole story, because you just got a little piece of the story, we do tours there. And I just want you to know that the women really did. They had strength, and they sacrificed, and they had spirit to do what they had to do. And it was wonderful to sit here now and see how Washington is flourishing because of these pioneers. Not only the men, but the children and the women. So we thank you tonight for coming. We're going to celebrate afterwards with cake, because Washington was named after George Washington. And I don't know how many of you know it, but today is his birthday. So sit back and enjoy, and thank you for coming.
A few of us are going to come over here and speak to you, because we got to use the board here, I guess you could say. So anyhow, my name's Robert Covington, and I deny everything that my wife just said. I will say that I spent many a nights out in the woodshed, so we'll just leave it at that. My name's Mike Harless, and tonight I'm going to try to explain some of the history of 70 years in 10 minutes or so. But we've got some good things that this city is all about, and there's one word called resilient. And me and Carmen were kind of talking about this, and anyhow, I think after some of the things I talk about and everybody else, you'll agree. So we'll start with the first one here. So the group came in early part of May of 1875 or 1857. And one of the first general authorities of the church to come through here was Lyman. And he came through May of 19th, so it was really shortly afterwards. He was returning from San Bernardino, California, with his group. They were in Santa Clara, and he left part of the group and took a couple people with him, and they came over to visit the new colony, the new settlement. And it's interesting what he said in his journal. He said, "This morning we traveled over a succession of low ridges, a distance of 10 miles. And then they eventually came to the Rio Virgin, and it's interesting, and he said where the mission for raising cotton had located their farm for this purpose. We found this mission consisting of 50 families under the presidency of Elder Covington, who informed me that he thought they could get in their present locality, 1,000 acres of good farming, which was kind of interesting. So, next one. So, by August, George A. Smith came through with an entourage, and one of the things he was doing is he was also General George A. Smith. He came through to look at the new settlements down here and inspect the troops. Militias had been formed because of issues that were going on with the natives, but also there was concern with Johnson's army and a few other things. When he arrived Tuesday the 18th at 10:30 a.m., he said we were cordially invited or cordially welcomed by President Covington and the rest of the brethren, who spared no pains to make our visit agreeable. This afternoon we spent in reviewing the troops, preaching and visiting in the field. There was only one field at this time, and it's the bottomlands down by Sullivan Park and Kirkland's farm. In looking at the improvements, Elder G.A. Smith remarked in relation to the settlement that he had never seen a more promising start in any of the settlements in the mountains, considering the late period at which it was commenced. Corn was doing finely. That planted by the Indians, the Native Americans here, being about 15 foot high, but that belonging to the brethren was not so high, having been planted as late as June 15th, and that's a late start. Cotton looked well, considering the lateness of planting, and the old cotton growers declared they had never seen cotton looking more thrifty with more bolls. The land adapted to farming purpose comprises only a few hundred acres, not 1,000. The rest of the country being the most barren, broken, desolate country I've ever been or seen or inhabited. So, and this is Carrington. He was the scribe, or you know what I'm saying, the secretary of the group, and this was a letter he wrote to the Deseret News and reporting on that. So, next one. So they no sooner got here, and this is what I'm going to talk about, resilient, because as soon as they would get their feet started, something would happen to the people here. And right off the bat was the Panic of 1857. Over speculation, the North was hit hard, the South was not. Cotton was not affected, which was a good thing because that's the biggest reason they were coming down here. What this did was this was the first financial crisis to spread rapidly through the United States, and it was because of technology, the telegraph. So everybody was getting all wound up. But there was no telegraph here yet, and so it didn't really affect everybody here. But later on, world economies, economy of the United States would affect them greatly. So what came? Civil War began in 1861. The Civil War was good for the South in the sense that cotton prices went out the window, which I'll show you in a second. This is how they got their money to finance their war on their end of it. The amount of cotton going out of the country, to other countries. The Union Army was kind of in a bad situation, but they also knew about this thing called gold in California, and this led to them going after it any way they could. We'll talk about the railroad and some other things. So the war was bad, but economically there was some good things. As you can see here, the South was just having a major economic boom from 1860 to 1866. I mean, this was the amount of cotton, the raw cotton that was going out. When you hear cotton is king and in the time of Annabella, this was it. But something interesting happened after by 1870. So the Cotton Mission Crop Report for 1864, and this was all the small towns in the county. Washington led the way with 140 acres. Still, once again, a little bit shy of that 1,000 acres that Covington thought they could get in. But it's interesting to see the diversification of what they grew and the reasons why. You see corn at 168 acres, wheat, cane, They did grow tobacco for certain purposes, vineyards of grapes for certain purposes, and other personal needs. What's interesting in the report is you see nothing on the blue dye of, and I have a hard time saying that. Thank you. George always corrects me on that. There was zero. And that was one of the biggest reasons why the Covington, the Adair group came down. What I found is they just couldn't grow it, and they had to go to other sources and things. So things are booming. Cotton's really looking good. Talk gets about, hey, look, we got all these towns, and they're producing cotton like crazy. They got their own little gins, and barns and whatever they can do. We need to step things up. So there was talk in 1864 about a cotton factory. And in 1865, it became a reality. They started construction on it. Well, here we go. No sooner started, what happens? The Civil War ends. Now there's concern what's going to happen to cotton. So all they can do is continue on and see what happens. By December of 1866, the cotton factory was completed. In 1867, it was in full get up and go. Now, if you look at this picture here, what you see is the pond up top where Walmart is. This was the water flue. That back little building was the actual gin with the wheel, and that's where they ginned and everything. That building right there was mostly a warehouse, because what they did is they would take the raw cotton, bundle it up, and then they would wagon it out to Salt Lake City. They needed it. They'd wagon it out to California. They'd wagon it out back to St. Louis. And there's reasons for that, and that's a discussion for another day. But things were looking good, but they were still worried about the economy of cotton. Anyhow, so in 1867, the cotton factory got the telegraph office. The telegraph line came in, and they had it as the mail office. And this picture dates it, because if you look right there, there's a telegraph pole. Next one. So the cotton factory in 1869, they started the Ward Co-op store, and they put it in the cotton factory. And then the railroad arrived in Utah. This was a very interesting thing. Brigham kind of had a heads up here what was going to happen. As much as he wanted to be isolated and things of that nature, he kind of knew it was coming. The other thing that happened was Pioche Mine began. They were digging for gold, silver, things of that for a reason. Next one. So it happened. 1869 to 1910, the steadily declined price of cotton after the Civil War went from 18 cents a pound to 5 cents a pound by the early 1890s. Overproduction. There just wasn't a need, and it's just like any bubble. You get too much, and supply and demand. So go ahead. So once again, they knew and were keeping an eye out to see what was going to happen. Well, resilience. The people and Brigham Young, they all decided, hey, let's diversify. Let's take the cotton factory and add 2 stores. Brigham Young had a wool factory up in Salt Lake City, and he moved it down here to be part of this. And the reason is because he got involved in the railroad business and took a short line from Brigham City down to Salt Lake City through Ogden. And they did that in 1870. He pretty much knew he was going to get things from back east cheaper than he could from getting it up here, because it would take any of the products they had here 30 days by wagon to get to Salt Lake City. And quadruple that how many times over to go through Las Vegas to San Bernardino. So Brigham Young, like I said, kind of knew, and he kind of cut his losses, but he set the people up down here, all the towns in the county, in a co-op. He called it the Zion's Cooperative Rio Virgin Manufacturing Company. And his company, which was a Rio Virgin Manufacturing Company, they sold the cotton factory to him. So now the people around here had full control of this cotton factory. So, it's up to them. It's going to make it or break it. The cotton factory, Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, ZCMI, I'm sure you've heard that. which was in Salt Lake City, they went ahead and got a branch office down here. And this addition right here was built just for that. Now, the co-op that was already here from the Washington ward was financially struggling real bad. There just wasn't a lot of money. A lot of things were a bartering system and a lot of other things. So they partnered up with the ZCMI, and that went on for a few years, which I'll show. Well, here we go. Panic of 1873. This one really hit. With the war being gone, this northern push to get the railroad to California to be able to bring gold and everything else, it was a bubble and it burst. The other thing was the government decided to take the silver standard and discontinued it. So Pioche was mining gold and silver, and mostly silver. Oh, great. This is a hit. Now, the other thing that the people here were doing, being so resourceful, is they were taking their farming goods and taking them to Pioche, because Pioche is so far away from anybody. So they had a market there that was some saving grace to make up for issues with the cotton. 1875, the Relief Society Hall right over here was built, and its main purpose was for the ward co-op. So they moved it from the cotton factory, and they severed their ties and their partnership with ZCMI, and they moved in there. Pioche, which you'll see in 1876, the next year closed because of the issue with silver. But Silver Reef Mine opened up and began, which is kind of interesting. So, like I said, so Pioche closed in 1876. Another big thing, Brigham Young died. The whole direction of the church went in a different direction. The federal government in 1878 created the Bland-Allison Act, and with the silver dollar was reinstated because it wasn't working. It caused so many problems economically. But that's good, because the people that were using silver coins were mostly your low-income people, your farmers and a lot of others. Just like today, there's a big difference between the price of silver and the price of gold. 1884, Silver Reef Mine closed, but it was able to carry on because of this act, where Pioche closed before this act came in, and basically it was a bailout. So 1889, they needed to do something with the dams around here. They were just continually breaking, busting, losing farming and everything else. So in 1889, the pile dam was built. Major engineering feat. Less than 6 months, floods, busted, didn't work. Blow to the city. So from 1889 to 1891, the fields were not watered. And what I mean by that, or the bottomland field were not watered. So in 1891, the diversion dam and canal was built, which is further up the river. But the canal to the oil fields was completed, so they could get back to farming. Outside of that, all the other towns were the ones that were supplying goods and cotton, because they were still doing cotton, and the factory was still working. 1893, the canal to the new fields, which are up on the Upper Mesa part, what we call the fields today, the canal was completed so they could get water. So that expanded the growing opportunity and everything else. 1899, the railroad from Milford to Lund, Utah came, saving grace. How long would it take to get a wagon from here to Lund, just outside Cedar City, to get your products and produce out, versus 30 days wagon up to Salt Lake City, and then 3 times that to go to California. Now, at that time, the railroad was at the Nevada state line. Then it eventually worked its way to California. So that was a saving grace in helping the city. 1903, the Ford Model A began production. And I throw that in there because this was another changing point. The cotton factory officially closed in 1910. And that was it. No more cotton, and bottom was completely out of everything, and it just kind of went into hibernation, I guess you could say. But this is interesting. In 1917, the Ford one-ton model TT began production. This is highly important because this was the next saving grace for the city, and George is going to talk about it in a second if you hit the next slide. So when I started by saying this word here, this describes this city. I just did 70 years in, 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I don't know, but amazing people that lived here in the early times. Amazing people that lived in the next half that is going to be talked about. So George, the mic is yours.
By raise of hands, how many of you know that Washington was the Garden City of Utah? Just a few of you. How many of you have a lot of success growing your garden down here now? Maybe it's because you don't get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and work till 10 and then go to bed, and get up at 5 o'clock in the afternoon and go back to work while it's a little bit cool. Maybe you don't get down in the creel and get a lot of manure and put on the garden spots and do it that way. But we were the Garden City of Utah. Why? Because it was necessary. The cotton factory closed down. That was their cash flow. When Washington City itself was laid out, it was 4 blocks wide, 6 blocks long. So it was a very small city. And what they did with the gardens here was amazing. 2 reasons they could be a garden city. One is we have 8 beautiful springs north of town, starting with the Green Springs, the Mill Creek, breaks off into the Tanner Ditch, the Warm Springs, the Adair Springs, and others that has water that is just the right temperature and just the right acidity for growing good gardens. Those beautiful springs still exist, but very few people use them, and that's sad. So let's look at the Garden City. Let's see what it was all about and what they did. If you look at, I don't know how well you can see this slide up here, but it says that we were the Garden City. Everybody had a small garden, but there were several people that had very large gardens. Those lots were basically 200 feet long and 168 feet wide. Those 28 blocks that made Washington City. If you look up here, I don't know how well you can see this or not, but that is Glenn Tobler with a wagon load of carrots. That's more carrots on that truck than what's been raised in the last 50 years in Washington, probably. Wait till you see one later picture of it. Another one. This here is William Weaver. William Weaver started to develop the purple onion, the Bermuda onion. He'd take a seed from those onions that was just a little bit more purple, a little bit sweeter, and he would grow those, and he's given credit for raising the purple Bermuda onion. And so things have happened well in here. As Mike told you, when the people came down, they planted cotton, but they also planted a lot of crops that were grown in the South. The nut trees, the fruit trees, molasses, and all those things. The Indians helped them to irrigate because the irrigation was different here than it was there. If you look right here, this is how all the gardens were done, all hand tools. This here is Miller Iverson, and he's in his onion patch. Then we moved over. Victor Iverson was the principal. Those tractors came about the time when I was a young boy, 80 years ago. And there was several of them in town of that size only. That's a very small one here. This picture here, that's my family. we're out bunching radishes out in the field. Grandpa's there, Dad's there, my little brother's there, my aunts are there, my mother's there. And this is the way that it was raised. So you can see that everything there was pretty much by hand. Next. This here is a dry onion patch. And I wished I had a picture of what I visualized how important the Shivwood Indians were to this group, to Washington City. They were very important. This is 2 Shivwoods out weeding the garden. Some days we would have 40 or 50 Shivwoods in Washington bunching, weeding, planting, doing those things. We had a very good relationship with them, and this just shows 2 of them. This is a dry Indian patch. Look how pretty that is, how clean it is. I don't know if you can find a place in Washington that is weed-free like that anymore. Next picture, please. This here is a Native American, a Shivwood, and she's bunching onions. And they would get paid by what we call the crate full. It was 10 dozen bunches. And they would bunch, and at the end of the day, they were paid. This next picture, my little sister's going to love. This is my little sister, Nancy. She's here. Nancy, she's right back there. Wave at her. And I like this picture because that's what really happened. We had a field right over by the 8 Springs, and there's a little hill that goes up, and one of the ladies that was bunching left, walked up the hill. About 4 hours later, she came back with a little baby in her hand and kept bunching the rest of the day. That's how dedicated they were. Next. This here is one of the trucks that we started to, we were able to haul stuff to Salt Lake City. Next. This here is what we kind of started with, is we would go from community to community, what we called peddling. And this has got carrots, cantaloupe, watermelon, corn. They would leave with these trucks. Before that, they'd go by a horse and wagon. And they'd take the stuff either up to Pioche or up to the Silver Reef. This now became a good cash crop because they had no industry in town whatsoever. There was no automobile stores, nothing. Nison's had a little market, and that was about it. The next picture that we're going to show was what we called the packing shed. And I want to tell you a little bit about the packing shed because it was what really made Washington, Washington. We had a co-op here, and they would order so many crates of produce from Salt Lake, and John Doe would get 5 crates, you'd get 40 crates, you'd get 6 crates, depending on the size of your garden. And people worked out really well. The packing shed was kind of interesting because it was built over the Tanner ditch, and they'd take the radishes that were bunched, dump them in the ditch, and they'd float down, wash themselves in the creek, go up an elevator, and be in the packing shed. This video is only about 1.5 minutes long. The first person you see in it is my back. I was about 13 years old. And we're all moving really fast. But you can see how many crates of radishes was in that day. We would send 2 big semi-loads out or 3 big semi-loads out for 3 or 4 weeks when the radishes and onions were ready. So if you want to play that, the music is fun. There I am. There's my little brother Ralph. There's my brother Stan. You can see the crates of... There's Mr. Nielsen. There's my brother again. There I am again. There's one of the twins. There's one of the twins. But you can see how many crates those were stacked. There's Mr. Nielsen. There's Mom and one of the little girls. Is that you, Nancy? But you can see how big of an operation this was for such a little town. You know, and you can see where you could put 2 or 3 big semi-loads with Rocky Mountain to take them to Salt Lake. In each of those crates, there was 10 dozen bunches of radishes and 2 scoops of ice that was in that. Now, why did we go into raising gardens here? Because of a necessity. Why did we stop raising gardens? UNI Sugar Beet Company started to give people the opportunity to raise sugar beet seed. And you could make money a lot easier and a lot more raising sugar beet seed than you could raising vegetables. And at this time also, as people started moving in and building a house or 2 houses or 3 houses on some of the land. So you can raise a good garden here. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. Leo Tobler, who is the son of the guy that had the carrots, he still raises tomatoes and cantaloupe and melons. His garden is 2 blocks here. And sometimes you'll come down the summer and see the sign, tomatoes. Go up, because he spends the time. He's up at 5 o'clock in the morning weeding. Thank you for your time.
If you were to take a minute and look up the word patriotism, either on Google or in the dictionary, you'd read a definition that a lot of you have already come to understand the meaning of the word. But the part of speech that patriotism is it's a noun. But I want to propose to you that in Washington, that word is much more of a verb, because we have showed a lot of action over the years. But what our community has done for veterans, for support of the military, and to honor their sacrifices. You can see here by this poster right here, there's 104 service members during World War II that were from Washington, Utah. That's with a base population in Utah that was right around 500. One of the highest percentages in the nation was served here. I want to tell you specifically about this young man right here. This is Flight Officer Rodney Nilsson that grew up just down the street over here. He was born to a local family, hardworking, worked in their gardens like George just explained. Hometown boy that when he was a young man, he heeded the call and went into World War II. He went into training and he left training as a flight officer. His first assignment was that he would serve in the Pacific Theater of War, and he was assigned to a photo reconnaissance unit in the 13th Air Force. He went on many missions and logged many hours in the plane, bringing back vital information from his cameras that hung at the belly of a P-38 airplane. There's a sample of it over here on the table if you'd like to look at it after. But bringing back that reconnaissance information was vital in helping to plan missions and being able to save American lives as we fought our way through the Pacific. On one specific occasion, where Rodney was the flight officer on a plane, they were out over the islands of the Philippines. And this was an unarmed aircraft. Like I said, it was for photographing. And they could see that they weren't going to make it back to Allied-held territory because they were running out of fuel. And so they started to work with the navigator on the plane to find a place to put the plane down. And they wanted to land it on water, but you didn't know where you were at. They did their very best that they could to be able to negotiate over water, but yet close enough to land that they'd be able to get to the shore before they become exhausted and would drown, or they didn't want to land too far out into the ocean for a lot of reasons. But anyway, as they came in, they were able to see the reflection of this of water. And so they landed their plane. They were able to get off, most of them. Rodney specifically got off the plane and was able to make it to shore. And this was a small island in the Philippines. And there was a village there. It was called Rotary Village. And the chieftain of that village, he was notified that when Rodney came ashore, that they took him and held him prisoner. And again, this is an enemy-held territory. And so it was very precarious, and Rodney knew that, but he didn't have any choice. That's where he went. He was hoping to be able to find somebody that would help him to find his way back to Allied lines. But anyway, this is kind of hard. I'm gonna do my best here. Anyway, he was turned over from the villagers to the Japanese forces that held that area. And 3 days later, he was taken to a command post where he was decapitated. And the story goes that a lot of his personal effects were distributed out among the people there. And eventually, his ring that had R.N. engraved on the inside of it was retrieved and was brought back as part of his personal effects. But after the war, Rodney's grave was located because of a local that showed them where his grave was at. He was buried in a very small circular grave. And of course, his body was taken and reburied in the Philippines in the Air Force cemetery there. But this is just one example of many. There's a lot of examples up there of soldiers and sailors, airmen and Marines that served in World War II from Washington. The history that Washington has is illustrious in many ways, and one of them is the way that we have always honored and respected and revered our military. I remember growing up, I was so proud of my brother-in-law that was first sergeant in the National Guard here. And everyone I knew was either in the Army or was going to go in. It was a proud heritage that we had here. But that's a little bit about our past. But as I prepared for this presentation, Rodney's story just beckoned to me because it really tells the horrors of war. It tells you that even when things shouldn't happen, they do. But on to more recent events. About a year ago, I had a good friend, a local friend of mine, call me and want me to come by his home to talk to me. And I said, okay, sure, I'll come by. And he proceeded to show me this flag that's in the frame right there. That is the flag that flew at the USS Utah in World War II. And I don't know if you know this or not, but the very first bomb for the United States in World War II that happened at Pearl Harbor hit the USS Utah. On board the USS Utah, there was 11 Utahns. The one did not make it. 58 sailors died in that attack. And it was a beautiful winter morning where we were able to gather at Veterans Park in front of the Veterans Memorial in beautiful Washington City and pay proper tribute. But then after that, we decided, why does it need to stop there? So my friend and I petitioned our legislature, and we talked to some good friends of ours that are senators and our legislators. And we asked them about the probability of running that resolution at the state level to bring in the entire state. And so that resolution now has passed, it's a concurrent resolution. It's passed the House unanimously. It's passed the Senate unanimously. All that's left is for the governor to sign it into law. And that will establish a statewide Day of Remembrance as December 7th. That will be set to start at 8:01 a.m. every December 7th. When you think of the sacrifice that was made by so few for so many, and we've heard those golden words uttered many times, it almost causes me to shrink, because what they were put through to enable us to have the lives that we have today, it means a lot. So what do we do as residents in Washington City to carry on, to do what we're doing, to live well, to provide a city for the world to come and seek refuge, and to be able to live in peace and harmony in a beautiful place with wonderful people that can find respite from the world. And I think that's the best tribute that we can do for our veterans. For me personally, I appreciate you being here tonight. I'm thankful for where I live, and I'm proud to be from Washington. Thank you.
If you're a veteran, raise your hand. Raise your hand for the veterans in here. If you served your country. I'm also an Air Force veteran. On behalf of all the veterans, thank you very much for doing this. Thank you. So, there we go. Mine's going to be short and sweet. Like many of you, I'm a transplant. I grew up just east of Moab in New York City. Moved out west after the military and raised my kids in California and was running a hotel that happened to be called the St. George Hotel. When an old commander of mine from 35 years ago came and his wife said, "Boy, you'd love the real St. George." I go, "Where's that?" She goes, "Oh, it's in Utah." I said, "Oh, no Utah, no Utah. Gray skies, nope. Snow, nope." She goes, "No, there's red rock and desert." I go, "In Utah? I gotta come check this out." So September 7th, 2017, I moved here with 3 suitcases and my DJ equipment, believe it or not, with a plan to retire. Fast forward to 4.5 years ago, and we created what has become a great organization, the Washington Area Chamber of Commerce. And we call it that because we serve small businesses all over the community, not just in Washington. And our office is in this tiny little building. If you know where the Granary building is, this picture is from 1996 when Mike Jensen, who runs Mike Barbershop, was the president of the Washington City Chamber. And look how pretty that building is, all clean, it's great. So that's 1996. This is fast forward to just this year, same building, a lot of activity. We have a lot of great members, active members that are from all over the community. And when they don't have a brick and mortar, we do the little ribbon cutting in front of that building, and then we pile inside like a bunch of college kids, and we take a photo like it's a phone booth. And we serve not only Washington, as I said, this is the Mulberry Inn, which used to be the Seven Wives. Is that what it was called? Right. So you can see a lot of people come out to support the community. It's another one. A lot of people. Those scissors are real. I can show you scars. They cut. A lot of active people that come out. We do all sorts of events for our women in business. We have one of the largest women's groups in southern Utah. that get together, and they meet here on the second Tuesday of every month right here at the dance hall. Great bunch. We have an aspiring local leaders group where we talk about things like how to do a P&L, how to hire and fire, how to market your business, how to deal with the different cities and all the different permit processes. Then we do a ton of events. You've probably been to them and didn't even know that they were part of the Washington Chamber. We do the first Friday music and movie night here in Veterans Park. The first Friday, April through September, we do a live band, and then we do a family-friendly movie for the kids. We do our gala. This was just here. You might recognize that guy. His sister's in the back. Hi, how are you? There you go. And it's our rock and roll gala. That's the theme. So we make all these great posters of people in these Rolling Stone covers. And we had, 200 plus people in here. It's a great event. We try and help the community as much as we can. We raised $8,000 for Shop for a Cop last year and presented that to the chief of police. And there were some very happy kids last Christmas. And then, of course, we just had our third annual Up and Away Hot Air Balloon and Music Festival. That's at Staheli Farm. I like to inflate the numbers. I'd say there was 1.5 million people there. It felt like it. We had somewhere between 10 and 12,000 people. A great event. We had food trucks. There we are acting up. Where's Melinda Covington? She's still here. Yeah, there she is. That's what she looks like as a brunette, everybody. And then we had our first ever legislative trip up to the Capitol. We met all of our legislators, our representatives, our senators, and had some pictures taken with the governor, and we had a great time. And that's the chamber. We hope you get a chance to experience it. Thank you.
How about this panel? Let's hear it one more time for these guys. What a great night. This has been a lot of fun. And thank you for being here. I hope you feel like this is time well spent. I know I'm learning a lot from each of these great people and the various aspects of our history that they're sharing. I want to ask you a question. We talk about why we call this area Dixie, where Dixie began. But the question I would ask you is, why did Dixie begin here? Water. Water is the answer. So if a mayor of a desert town like Washington has 10 minutes to speak, he's going to use that time on water. And I'm going to try to bridge a few of those holes and a few of those gaps from our history to where we are today. Let's go to that first slide, Mike. But we weren't the first ones here. This was a picture of a southern Paiute, and initially it was Father Escalante with that Spanish expedition, and he talked about, I'm going to get this quote right, he said that in 1776, the Southern Paiutes did horticulture. There were well-dug irrigation ditches being used to water small fields of corn, pumpkin, squash, and sunflowers. Water was the crucial element to traditional Paiute lifeways and subsequent strategies. And I find it very interesting that Uncle George spoke about the Shivwits, which is a band of the Paiutes, being so instrumental in helping those first settlers down here. And there's certainly Native American influence here that I think we would be remiss if we didn't remember that in our history. Let's go to that next slide. This is another apostle. This is Parley P. Pratt. He was sent down to the Virgin River Basin in 1849, it was commissioned by the Legislative Assembly of the State of Deseret for an exploring party to southern Utah. With regards to the Virgin River, he wrote, "Several miles in length, loose sandy soil, very pleasant for farming, extremely fertile and easily watered." And I think this was his understatement, although that one may have been an understatement as well. His understatement was sometimes subject to overflow. Let's go to that next slide. This was the next apostle that came was John D. Lee. I believe he was an apostle. I don't know. I'm not a church historian. But John D. Lee and 11 other men explored the Virgin River Valley in 1852. They used the word anxious. I think they meant more excited or enthusiastic about the settlement of this area. He reported back saying, "I am more than anxious about the formation of a new settlement in the south, the rich soil and abundant streams of pure water. Here we can raise cotton." And so you've heard about the Covington and the Adair companies, but suffice it to say, as been said here, is they settled here because of the proximity to the aforementioned springs and access to those springs and to the Virgin River. Let's go to the next slide. So I find it fascinating that those early settlers didn't waste any time in farming, but also in industry. It's fascinating to think of how quickly they got to work building the cotton factory. And of course, this is 1877 after the second and third stories were added. But if you stop to think about why the cotton factory was built here, it's quite obvious. It's just across the Mill Creek, which runs right in between us. So the Mill Creek is a small stream, unless it's flooding, that was able to give power to run the operations of the cotton factory. So again, why did Dixie begin? It began because of water. But what made us be able to survive in this desert climate was the resilience, that grit, I like to say, built on a lava rock foundation with sandstone walls, of building up infrastructure. We've heard about industry and patriotism, but it's also that infrastructure that we see here with this is the spillway associated with the diversion dam. And I think it wouldn't be complete and I wish I had gotten some pictures to Mike earlier, but this diversion dam, this is the spillway for the dam, but this is where they would divert water from the Virgin River. And they built this 5-mile canal that went around Schnabkaib and all the way through all of those farming fields. And for many, many years, they built that with shovel and with horses and just all kinds of grit. But that 5-mile canal was a dirt canal for many years. And then at some point during the 1900s, George might know when, it was, they concreted in the canal. So they put cement in there. And it served to flood irrigate all the fields for the farming operations. So you'd go from that cotton to that garden, and then all the farming operations were the industry for many years. And since then, it was in the early 2000s, I believe, that the canal has since been piped, but that easement is still there. So that's a big part of our history and heritage. Let's go to the next slide, though. I want to talk just briefly. And I hope you'll let me give just a little bit of just personal privilege here. This is my great-grandfather. And his name is Franklin Staheli. And he was one of those Swiss settlers that was over in Santa Clara that was settled just a little bit before Washington. But the reason that he came over with the Toblers, I see Paul in the back, or did see him earlier, the reason they came over to Washington was to work at a cotton factory. It was where there was a little bit of opportunity, a little bit of industry. But I read from his story, his life story, and I just want to share a little bit and then kind of bounce off that to today. But he said, when I first went in as mayor, I began taking up putting in a water system, but every councilman was against me. I've been there. I hear you, Grandpa. Then when I was reelected in 1929 with the new city council, most of them were in favor of the system. We held our first meeting in January of 1830, and all but one voted for it. In October of 1930, we started digging trenches and laying pipes. We completed most of it that year, but added to it later. I was responsible for getting the ditches in Washington rocked and cemented, and also for building dikes above town to keep the floods away. Floods have done much damage in the town in the past. Then he says, after the dikes were built, we fixed up our streets and roads. And then I think this is, to me, maybe the most inspirational thing that he said, that I keep in mind always. He said, "I've always believed in building up and advancing." And so it's fascinating to think that here we are today, almost 100 years later, and we're dealing with the same issues, but it's on a completely different scale. We deal with those floods. We deal with those monsoonal rains. I mean, some of you who live downtown have experienced that, and after we've figured out again, I guess we should have learned the first time to keep it diked up above, but we've rebuilt Main Street. We have hundreds and hundreds of miles of a storm drain pipe and sewer pipe and water pipe, and all of that has gone out through a network that started as this pioneer town to what is now, more than kind of, it's a thriving city. Along the way, we've had some pretty amazing things that have been built. We have the Green Spring Golf Course. We have our community center. We have these amazing neighborhoods, and we have all these modern services. But I think what's important is that we haven't forgotten that past. We haven't forgotten our pioneer heritage. And so if you haven't been out to some of the celebrations that we have, I invite you to come out to Cotton Days. It's celebrated the last week in April. I invite you to come out on Veterans Day. We celebrate Veterans Day here in Washington for the entire county. I invite you to come out to Christmas in Dixie in the winter. But just kind of in closing, we go to that last slide, because of that industry, because of that infrastructure, because of that patriotism, that resiliency, Washington City was named by Wallet Hub 2 years in a row as the #1 small city in America to start a business. And so we're starting to see that as we've transitioned from these various types of industry, today we still have that forward-thinking and industrious blood running through our veins. But back to water, just in closing, the cotton factory was an undertaking of their time. The diversion dam and the canals were undertakings. What are some of the undertakings of our time with respect to water? I can tell you that we've built reservoirs, but we need to build Warner Valley Reservoir. That's another one. And why is Warner Valley such an important key? Collectively, we've got to be able to build a regional reuse system so we can take that water that after it's used and treated at the facility down in St. George, we've got to be able to pump it, pipe it, store it, and reuse it. The other things that we're doing is in Washington now, we are encouraging better stewardship and better use of water. If you have a smartphone with you, you have access to monitor your water usage that's on a smart meter on your home. We've saved millions. We've saved about, just in this last year, 1 million square feet of grass has been converted into desertscapes, saving 52 million gallons of water per year. We've recently built additional wells up in the reserve. We've done some pretty cool things. If you've seen the Warm Spring, the boilers, we've turned that into a park. It's now it's called the Boilers, a natural park, a natural spring and conservation garden. And then lastly, I think one of the things that we can do going forward is, I talked just briefly about the canal. That canal that goes around Schnabkheim and all the way down along the bench towards Crimson Cliffs High School. And so where that's been piped now, one of the things that the city's planning on doing is as a continued use of that canal, but also to teach the history and the heritage of this area is to put a historic canal trail on top of that easement. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got a lot of things to do, but this is a thriving, prospering community, and it's only happened because of that, of those pioneer settlers, of those who came before us. We stand on their shoulders. And it's an honor, I think, for all of us to do our part in the community to continue on the great tradition of this city we love called Washington. Thank you.
What a great wealth of knowledge this panel has shared with us from our early days, the cotton factory, the garden city, our military history, our economy, our chamber, and the value of water. I hope each of us can leave here today with a greater understanding of where we've come from and how our pioneer heritage is guiding our future here in Washington. Washington City is a thriving city of people for all ages. We are the fastest growing city in the fastest growing county in the fastest growing state in the country. New homes are being built to accommodate this growth. Hotels are being built to accommodate the millions of tourists that come to Washington County every year. The city is investing in infrastructure, roads, parks, recreation to maintain a high quality of life for its residents. It's never easy to balance the future needs with historic ideals, but our city leadership is guiding our growth with the past in mind. Recently, Washington City was ranked the #1 city among best places to live in southern Utah by Niche. They reported that living in Washington offers residents a suburban-rural mix with well-maintained parks and trails. Washington is an amazing place to live because of our family-friendly environment, wonderful climate, a growing economy, unparalleled outdoor activities, and easy access to reservoirs, the mountains, and national parks. There are several organizations who promote year-round activities that Mayor has mentioned, including the local Chamber of Commerce, the Lions Club, the Rotary, the Sons and Daughters of the Utah Pioneers, churches, schools, and others. The Washington City Historical Society functions in helping others to preserve their legacy and to find and save the history of our city and its early pioneers. As the mayor mentioned, Washington City is the #1 small city in America to start a business. Our regulatory and tax environment is friendly to those seeking to start businesses and create jobs in southern Utah. Our commercial growth is picking up, and additional goods and services are on the way. To sum up this great pioneering city, as quoted in Washington City Magazine, more than 150 years ago, Washington City was the birthplace of the Southern Utah Cotton Mission. Today, Washington City continues to enjoy its reputation as a leading city in the county community where young families thrive, retired folks flourish, and visitors return again and again to enjoy the mild weather, the friendly people, the awesome landscape, and a peaceful lifestyle. Washington City will continue to grow, but will always be the place where Dixie began, and where our pioneer heritage is so deeply ingrained in who we are. So thank you so much for attending to learn more about our history, to learn more about what makes Washington uniquely Washington. As was stated, it is George Washington's birthday this week, so we will be serving birthday cake. Thank you to those who provided and will serve this cake. Thank you again to the Nison's Band who will continue to play, and to our youth council for hosting us tonight. The panel will stick around. If any of you have questions, especially George here knows everyone and everything about this city. So if you have some questions, the panel will stick around. They'd be happy to answer that. But thank you so much for attending tonight, and we hope that you leave tonight knowing a little bit more and having a little more respect for this great city. Thank you.